Okay, welcome everybody. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of the Friday afternoon vibes. Brought to you by Laura G.
I'm
um,
Jazzy G today.
DJ G.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're going to start the presentation with Olivia Rowe shortly, but just in case, if you have any problems connecting with Zoom or need any support, please send a message in the chat to Martinos Support, who's going to help you if you need anything. If you have questions for the presentation, please use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to post your questions, and we will get to those in the end of the presentation. What you can also do if you want to ask your own question instead of that I'm asking your question, you can also raise your hands. You can also see that in the bottom of your screen in the options below. So you can actually click on it and I can unmute your microphone and you can ask your own questions in the end of the presentation. And last but not least, if you have any social hour selfies, you can always use the hashtag MGH.HARVARD.EDU. And otherwise, I mean, Olivia, the floor is yours. Enjoy.
Thanks. So our lovely host asked if I would start out with just talking about myself a little bit. So my name's Olivia Rowe. I graduated from Northeastern and currently work for Robert Barry's lab, the Brain and Spinal Cord Lab, where we do functional imaging of the spinal cord. Before that, I did some research in how exercise affects cognition, and then spent some time and still currently help out at Spalding in their neuro rehab department, and kind of got a great appreciation for plasticity and studying the brain and the nervous system. And so, yeah, and with that being said, we'll start the presentation here. I'd like to preface this talk by saying that there's a couple text-heavy slides, just so, since it's being recorded, and therefore you can use it as a resource later to reference back to. And so, yeah, I'd like to welcome you to what I believe is the first Science on Tap presentation that involves no MR physics, but I hope by sharing this, it'll help you all by alleviating a little bit of some administrative burdens of research and giving you more time to do actual science. And my main goal in hoping to do that is by convincing you to break up with paper. So what is so bad about paper? Well, first off, it takes up so much space at our center. I mean, we have binders, cabinets, rooms full of, study binders and paper forms, keeping track of all our research studies. We spend a lot of time updating these forms, printing wrong versions. And then there's that environmental harm of how much paper we just go through at the Martinos Center. And then once you have those forms printed, you have to go hunt down Mary and Larry to get signatures on some of them. And then some of our forms just become outdated because we haven't updated them for kind of our evolving society. Then you have the IRB and HIPAA incompatibilities because many IRB forms can be maintained digitally. You are allowed to maintain your IRB binders online for the most part. And then, people leave paper in places they shouldn't, and that poses a, HIPAA risk. And they're also just inflexible because we can't really distribute forms in advance. So there's kind of this room to improve our screening methods. So just to give you guys a little bit of a backstory as to how this all started, when I started working for Rob, we not only bonded over our appreciation for corny jokes, which I'm sorry you'll all be subjected to, but also kind of shared this belief that one of the top research hospitals was still so paper focused. So kind of in between our lab's projects, I collaborated with Mary and Larry and Bill and Monica and our kind of top 10 users at the Martinos Center to develop a process that moved all of our center-wide forms and some other forms that are, used by the majority to REDCap. So that includes the following forms: our safety screening form, the pregnancy screening form, the MR checklist, which we're supposed to use, not everyone uses, the subject payment form, and then I'll spend a little bit of time just mentioning kind of the consent documents and pre-screening documents you're able to put in a REDCap. But these are all kind of individualized at your lab's level, so it's not something we're going to be universally sharing. So how does this process work? Here's kind of an overview of the process. It looks very overwhelming. I promise it's not. It's just going to answer all of those what if scenarios that might run through your head in having everything digital. So really part one is just getting your subject's information in order to distribute the safety screening form. All you need is an email address, and you can get that in any way from however you recruit participants, whether that be digital, paper, handouts. All you do is go into REDCap, press add edit records, and you create a participant, put in their name, email, and that'll send them this safety screening form. So before I share the actual form with you all, I just want to point out kind of how it looks for different research positions at our center with this new workflow. So from the subject side, they're now able to fill out this form from home, and they can upload their own documentation if they have it on hand, kind of geared more towards our millennial crowds who may have better access to their digital health records, or individuals who are on top of their health and might have a lot of documentation they're keeping up with. There's branching logic in place, which I'll kind of explain a little bit better in a minute. If any participant answers yes to potential contraindications, there's a more thorough method for getting what we need out of them. From our RAs and CRCs side of things, you'll get notified as soon as a subject completes the safety survey. And then you can go in, review the forms, and see if you need to collect any documentations and coordinate that with the subject. You're kind of serve as the first point of contact for reviewing someone's scanning eligibility in this form. And then, if you have other questions you use in the pre-screening form, there's that as well. If someone does answer yes to a potential contraindication, you'll get another email trigger with that separately. PIs are only ever emailed in the current setup if there's a potential pregnancy, just because we have a whole separate form for that. So we figured it was a bigger thing to just make sure more people were getting emailed. From the MR Tech side of thing, which I think is the best part, once you review the forms, upload documentations you need, approve the safety forms to send to an MR Tech, they just do a digital sign-off. We, with collaboration with SAML, created an email address for the MR Techs. And then once they sign off, you'll also get re-notified when that sign-off's complete. So this is just what the form looks like, and throughout the presentation, I'll mention a couple places that are starred that I think are of more significance. The first one being where it's biological sex and are you of childbearing potential. If you answer biological sex female, you'll be prompted to answer whether or not you're of childbearing potential. Answering yes to that question will then prompt the participant to answer the pregnancy screening form. So no longer are we needing to, if needed within your lab, distribute the pregnancy screening form. You don't need to distribute it to everyone. You'll only need to, it'll be tailored towards who the participant actually is. In addition to that, it's 2020 now, so we have identified not only kind of biological sex, but also self-identified gender, giving more flexibility to our demographic acquisitions. There's also kind of a little quick and dirty BMI output. The participant doesn't see that on their end. This is from, our lab side of things, and that's just automatically calculated, just so you kind of know the stature of your subject. And then finally is kind of the MR screening questions. We have our kind of, hard nose at the center. If you have surgical aneurysm clips, neurostimulators, cardiac pacemakers, where you're definitely not scanning that participant. And so they'll get real-time feedback. If they put yes, they'll know they're not eligible to participate in this study right away. And then we kind of updated a few questions too with help from Mary and Larry. I sat down with them and went through all of our current questions. Again, it looks like a long form, but these are all the questions, not just the branching logic. So this would, the form would look like this theoretically if you answered yes to every single contraindication. Questions such as hearing aids or dentures, you no longer need a sign off for. It just prompts the participant, please remove these items on the day of your scan, and just notifies the CRC that this will be something to review when they're in. Tattoos have been updated to include, you know, those cosmetic tattoos that people now get. And then there's also some questions where if you can upload your own documentation, for example, if you press yes, you have metal rods, plates, or screws, it asks you to explain where they're located and if known, the material type, and also says, you know, if you have a copy of your operation notes or a surgery letter card detailing the procedure, you can upload it here. So it gives more power to the participant to upload some of this information and take a little bit more of the administrative burden off of you. So here's just two more places where there's that branching logic. Again, there's the pregnancy screening form, which only flags if the participant is female and of biological or of childbearing potential. And if, you know, it's a male or not a childbearing potential, this entire form doesn't show up. And then the other one is the sign off for the MR text. You can see the question kind of right below the arrow where it says lab level approval. And there you can just kind of track whether or not the participant's ready to send to Mary and Larry, which happens when you press yes. No, if the participant is just ineligible to be scanned, you already know. You can mark pending if you need to track, you know, who needs documentation, who do you need to coordinate with. And then not necessary if the participant has dentures, hearing aids, or a transdermal patch. And then also if the participant doesn't upload information, that's also where you can upload documentation on our end or Mary and Larry's end. And again, this whole form only shows up if there's a potential contraindication. If not, you're good to scan. Part 3 is kind of the only new addition to our forms. And that's just, you know, in case you have your 75-year-old patient who decided last week was a good time for a fresh tattoo. You'll know on the day of scan, because participants can fill this out days or, you know, weeks in advance. You'll have the most up-to-date information. So all you do with that form is make sure you consent the subject, paper or REDCap, however you do it, before you review the form. Then you sit down, review the form with them, and then you sign off that everything's up to date, and the participant signs off that everything's up to date. And so here's what that looks like. There's a little star for, you know, please complete the consent process before you review. And then if there's any contraindications, you can mark, you know, yes, something's changed, no, something hasn't, what's changed, etc. And, you know, those questions only get more complicated if someone's situation gets more complicated. And there's just the scanner checklist. You sign off on everything that, you know, Mary and Larry want us to do. So we have none of those situations that appear in her presentations. And then you sign off. And then finally, when I had met with some of the groups at the center, just that the top 10 users to see how this would work with their labs, someone said, well, you've gotten this far. Can the subject payment form also be in REDCap? So we went ahead, consulted with Monica and Nelson, and just inputted the subject payment form in REDCap as well. When you're ready to send, you just on number 6 press yes, and that notifies our billing department via their own email to process the payment. And then they have a little drop down box to press complete once the payment's been processed on their end, which is just putting it into whatever pipeline they use. If you don't use that form of billing, then obviously the situation will change. So just kind of recap REDCap, why go digital? You have your email sign-offs now. Streamlined screening, you won't have any kind of last minute surprises, or at least a decreased risk of them. And you'll have more time to prepare documentations, because sometimes, you know, participants are eligible and it's just, you get them in and you don't realize what documentation you need, or something pops up and you've already spent money to book the scanner. So, there's a lot of issues that can happen there. There's better HIPAA compliancy. We will not have those floating forms on the red line story at our center. There's better guided directions for what relevant information subjects should be providing rather than just explain your situation. And, they might over-explain or over-mark things. Now they'll really know what counts as a contraindication. Again, all these questions were updated with Mary and Larry's approval, and subjects get that real-time feedback of their eligibility status for the most part. That branching logic allows those more relevant questions to be added, and it's secure. REDCap keeps audit trails and really thorough documentation of all your participants. All changes marked to forms, whom to make those changes, that's all documented in REDCap. It's a really great system. And then finally, just in case, everything's online, you will not need copies of forms, and if dogs somehow are one day allowed at the Martinos Center, they will not eat our forms. Then just to quickly mention 2 other possible REDCap uses. One is integration of surveys with Epic. You can actually export Epic information into REDCap. It's still kind of in development and you need IRB approval, but just want to mention it. And then also you can transition your consent forms and your pre-screening forms into REDCap, either building them from scratch, or REDCap has some pretty great generic consent templates that work great and are flexible. And then next steps, what happens now? Right now, our group's just trialing it, but keep us in mind for future studies. We've created a guide for how to set this up, along with a data dictionary that directly imports what we create into your REDCap. And we'll be looking for, other groups to try this out kind of in the near future. And then here's just some common FAQs I thought people might have that, it probably does look a little bit more complicated than these easy paper forms we have. But theoretically, we went into a lot of detail here on the small improvements to our forms and kind of tried to cover all those what if scenarios. What if someone has this contraindication? What does that look like? So you can go back through this presentation and look for questions, or I guess potential contraindications that are more relevant to your research. And then, what if you don't want to put all your forms entirely into REDCap, or if you want to make edits, that's fine. Upon importing the data dictionary we're sharing, the forms are completely customizable. Just make sure you make those adjustments reflective in your IRB submittal. And then what if you use a different payment processing, like the psychiatry groups? You can completely customize all of these forms still. You can adjust the payment process for whatever works for your group, such as swapping who gets that payment email, what payment questions you have. And then how do you go about getting IRB approval? We've already gotten through the whole trouble of getting the IRB to approve this process. So we have a templated amendment that we're willing to share with people once kind of higher up gives us the approval to expand this a little bit more center-wide. And then, do you have to go digital? No. If you and paper are great friends, you can continue to be friends forever. It's just kind of a newer option to consider for your future studies you start rolling out. And with that, here is my information. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to shoot me an email. And then special thanks to all the people listed below who gave me feedback and took the time to make sure that this process would eventually work. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Olivia. It was great. There are some questions, but I think this is already an amazing achievement that you got through with this this automated system. There was one question about if someone is working with mildly cognitively impaired patients. Sorry, it's Friday afternoon. Can they also send it to the patient and the caregiver instead of only the patient?
So how it works with the emails is REDCap has its own section called email trigger notifications, and you set the parameters for what questions flag as an email trigger, and you choose who that email goes to. So you can always add, if you have another patient or guardian or whoever else needs that form, there can be an additional email tagged onto who gets that form. And again, if you have, I imagine maybe also for people who do maybe a bit younger studies or cognitive impairment, you'll want more questions regarding guardianship or, whoever's in charge of their health to have these questions, so you can update the form throughout to have more options, especially if you need them to sign off on other questions.
Okay, that's great. And then there was, of course, you expected that there's some thoughts about that, that option about like sex, male or female, or if that there are other biological, or is it a biological sex, or are there options that you can say like doesn't want to share, or like that? Yeah. Do we have that in the REDCap too?
We know that the kind of pregnancy screening form's always been, I mean, in our PI, Rob, he was one of those big advocates for, whether or not someone's required to get a urine test, blah, blah, blah. So like we try to make it as inclusive as possible, rather than, because right now our group at least distributes the pregnancy screening form to everyone. I mean, no matter who they are, what their gender is, biological sex. So we try to target questions by distinguishing, yes, giving people an option of a self-identified, however they identify their gender. They can put in whatever they'd like. It's an open text box to make that as inclusive as possible. But then also when it came down to it, if someone is capable of having children, we wanted them to definitely be screened for the pregnancy potential. So we left that as the biological sex component. We can always, if people think we should change it to say sex assigned at birth, that's an easy fix or adjustment we can make. Would appreciate any feedback anyone has on that. Please shoot me an email, because that is something we went back and forth on debating how to phrase it the most appropriately.
Yeah, I think there's some people that have some thoughts on that. I saw something come by on the chat. So please, if share your thoughts with her directly on her email that you see on the screen, so she can incorporate that, your thoughts. And then I had Michael. Yeah, Mike. I just allowed you to talk, so if you like to ask your question, go ahead.
Hi there. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
So Olivia, great job. Really appreciate that. So it's really helpful that, if we could all use the screening form and the safety form. But one of the issues that our lab has come across with REDCap, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts or workarounds, is that a lot of the questionnaires and psychometrics that we all of us at Martinos Center use are technically copyrighted, which means that REDCap disallows sharing. And practically all that means is that each of us has to, as an individual lab, take the time to enter in, whatever Beck depression inventory or something that we all use, but it's copyrighted. And I was wondering if there's any thoughts about a way that we could all sort of share across labs so we didn't have to replicate this work over and over.
Have you tried sharing a data dictionary with other groups?
No, data dictionary. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, so REDCap is, so how this would essentially work is that someone would have to go in and input the questionnaire that is quote unquote copyrighted into REDCap manually. But then what you would do from there is there's something called a data dictionary, and it's basically, if you download it, it looks just like a complicated Excel sheet. But REDCap is able to interpret that to replicate all those questions to whoever you're sharing it with. So I imagine that could be a possible workaround.
I see. So it basically means that one person does all the REDCap entering, which is a little bit painstaking, but then there's sort of like a raw code format that other labs can use.
Exactly. Yep. So it would, someone would have to be kind of like the martyr and
but I appreciate that.
But then we would have it, and you can divide up what groups have to do what. But then it's just kind of like a raw code that you can share and then adjust from there too if people need to tack on more questions. That's probably how we'll share our forms, is just as a data dictionary, just because I know that not all of this entire process is relevant to everyone. But there's some processes that'll apply to at least some people. So
okay, I appreciate that. I didn't know about the data dictionary. Thanks.
And if you want to, you can shoot me an email, and I can kind of, share where that is in REDCap with you.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think we're gonna just wrap it up. If you have questions on it, you can of course shoot Olivia an email, but we also have these in the Microsoft Teams, so you can also start some discussion there if you like. With that, I think all that's left is to wish you all a happy Friday, yeah, and a good rest of your weekend.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, thank you all. And again, I see all the comments kind of about the wording for kind of distinguishing the sex aspects. So I'll definitely go in and look into those for everyone, because I agree that this is a lot more clarity, and having you all who have personal experiences with these kind of questions is definitely helpful. So thank you.